So with recent featherweight matchups being made, such as, Ilya Topuria finally getting his title shot against Alexander Volkanovski, with all that stuff going on, and then everyone's up in arms about Colby Covington getting a title shot, and then talking about his current resume, it made me start thinking, what the fuck is Brian Ortega doing? What the fuck has this guy done? And why is he... And it's not even the fact of, oh, man, he's injured out. Why is he still number 3 in the division? Why is he number 3? Who has he beaten? His last win was a decision win against the Korean Zombie, who just retired. And fair play at the time, it was a pretty good win, and it was a good showcase. But before that, he got absolutely outclassed by Max Holloway for the featherweight title. Got his face broken, basically. I believe it was I think he broke his orbital, and then he had a doctor stoppage of that, but he was getting his ass kicked. He got striking records broken on his face. And the only thing people could really say about that fight was, wow, Brian Ortega's really tough. That's not something you want to hear. That's never something you want to hear as a fighter. You might want to hear it if it's like, oh man, with every other record. Like for Max Holloway, it's different, but it's also concerning because that means Max Holloway is going to probably retire like 33 or 34. But then he beats the Korean Zombie after a year layoff. That makes sense, He just took a lot of damage. He needs to recover from, the CTE he was just given. He then beats the Korean Zombie, a decision, really good striking in that fight. That was a very good fight. He then gets a title shot. What? Why would he get a title shot on a one-fight win streak? But he gets it against the new champion, Alexander Volkanovski, coming off 2 wins against Max Holloway. So, it's a new person. He couldn't beat Max Holloway, so he's definitely going to beat the guy that just beat him twice. They coached a season of Tough. I think it's Tough 29, which was like the first Tough season that I had watched of like a newer one. It was absolutely horrible. And then fight happens, and he loses every round, and people for some reason think he won the 3rd round, but he didn't. He had the 2 submission attempts. That wasn't enough with the amount of damage he was taking. He was getting absolutely clubbered. He got an orbital fracture bone. He got his orbital fractured. He got a bruised rib. Took a lot of damage in that. It was a fight of the year candidate. It was one of my fight of the years of that year, and it was amazing. I've shown that to a lot of my friends who are trying to get into MMA because just good fight. I think it was from 2022. Really good fight. Or it was 2021. I think it was 2021, yeah. He then comes back for, Fight Night Long Island or something in New York against Yair Rodriguez. Good fight, on paper of, oh, man, you got these 2 top guys. Both lost to Max Holloway. But Yair made it really competitive against Max Holloway, to the point where Max Holloway had to be shooting, getting takedowns on Yair Rodriguez. But I was like, man, Brian Ortega can win this fight because he's a decent striker. He's a competent enough striker. And Yair Rodriguez, yes, he does a lot of damage, but he isn't going to do, absolute crazy damage on the ground. And Yair is not going to try to go to the ground with Brian Ortega. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, Brian Ortega's just going to beat him. And, Yair Rodriguez taking a lot of damage, all the time off he had. He then starts dominating Brian Ortega, and then I forgot it was a triangle, and it accidentally is freak accident, but Brian Ortega's shoulder pops out, I believe, and, he loses that. It's a TKO loss for him. Freak accident, that's 10 out of 10 times that does not happen, but, that happened. That was back in 2022. So, 2 fight losing streak. Last win was against the Korean Zombie. I think his last win was against his last win was Frankie Edgar before that, which at the time, good win, because I believe Frankie Edgar fought for the title after that, I think, which also weird, just weird era in general. But he has not fought since then, and people were talking about he fumbled Tracy Cortez. This man's fumbling his career. At the same time, can you really say he's fumbling it if he's still number fucking 3 in the division? And I guess my main thing is, why? One, he hasn't beaten anyone. I'm pretty sure he failed a drug test before, near the start of his career, so it's not like he's this super clean, trustworthy athlete. I mean, he obviously hasn't failed it since then, but, still, it's going to be in the back of your head. And he doesn't really bring in numbers. His fight with Max Holloway did not sell, 200,000, 300,000. Max Holloway's pay-per-views never really sell that well, which is kind of weird considering everyone likes him. But he isn't really that fan favorite. I think he had 400,000 followers on Instagram. Doesn't really bring in those numbers. Doesn't really bring in the eyes. He's kind of forgettable, honestly, which is weird considering he's a really good finisher. his, like, run of finishes that he got on the way to his title fight were really impressive and all that stuff. And that was before I became an MMA fan. But it's still something I've seen and, like, I've watched his fights before. And, like, I wish he would fight because I think he can do a lot in that. But I just get really angry when people are like, oh, don't, Brian Ortega, best grappler in the division. I'm like, on paper, yeah. In theory, yeah. In practice, no, not really. He hasn't shown it. So there's not really that many good grapplers. I'd say, like, Ilya Topuria, Bryce Mitchell, those two are pretty good with that, but they're, at least for Bryce Mitchell, other than his fight against Ilya Topuria, which he lost, is just kind of improving. Like, him against Edson Barboza was really good. But, you know, I'd say one of those two probably could beat Brian Ortega, honestly. Like, Ilya definitely, I think, absolutely, like, batters him. On ground, it's a 50-50 in my opinion, but they're both black belts, and Ilya submitted Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell against Brian Ortega, I'd watch that. I think that would be a good fight to see, but I'm also like, they're most likely going to give him, like, with how they treat his career, they're probably going to give him, like, Josh Emmett, just like, hey, let's give you a free win with that, we're going to be Josh Emmett. And yes, Josh Emmett is a free win. He got an interim title fight off of 2 robbery wins. One against Dan Ige. I say robbery, not the worst robbery, but still pretty bad. And then Calvin Kattar, which there's, like, an interview he did with, like, Michael Bisping. I forget if it was on his channel or if it was on, like, the Believe You Me podcast. And his face is battered, it's swollen, and Calvin Kattar is, like, uninjured. I'm like, how the fuck do you win that decision? And it's like, oh, he doesn't. That's how it works. But, you know, so Josh Emmett, they're like, oh, Josh Emmett has this crazy power. No, he's got a okay overhand, but that's the only thing he throws. So I think that's an easy win for Brian Ortega, who I think that's who they're going to give him. But I've heard stuff like MMA Guru was talking about giving him Yair Rodriguez. I could see that, but I see that less. I don't know. With Yair Rodriguez is, like, a very entitled kind of person with that. He beats Brian Ortega by a fluke win after losing Max Holloway, and he's like, I'm going to wait for the title, and he gets an interim title fight for that. So I don't see him being like, oh, yeah, I already beat him, I don't need to fight him again, even though it's a pretty fluky win. But you were winning at the time, I get it, but I just can't see it happen. I don't see Yair Rodriguez wanting that fight. That he's going to try to fight, like, Giga Chikadze, maybe, because, you know, striker on striker, and I think Yair beats him with that. But I'm just saying, Josh Emmett's really the only person I see them giving him. Number 3 versus, is he 6 or 7? Or maybe he's lower. I don't remember how far down he went after losing to Ilya and that. But at this rate, they're like, oh, yeah, Josh Emmett still needs to recover. Well, Brian Ortega doesn't seem to be in a hurry to get back in the cage. There's been no real fight announcements of his. But, you know, it's just crazy. And what is it? I saw Arnold Allen, who's coming off his decision loss to Max Holloway, which that's his only loss in it. He's fighting Movsar Evloev, who is undefeated in MMA and UFC, obviously. Brian Ortega should be fighting Movsar Evloev. If anyone should be giving up their ranking spot or risking it against one of these up-and-comers, it should be Brian Ortega. Arnold Allen fought Max Holloway and did not do horrible. It was he lost, clearly, but he did really good on that, and it was way closer than against Calvin Kattar. So I just don't understand what the fuck the UFC are doing. Like, why you're doing this, because he doesn't sell. His chance of becoming UFC champion are about pretty slim, honestly. I mean, I know he got really close to submitting Alexander Volkanovski, but that's the equivalent of knocking down a fighter. That's basically knocking down a fighter, but for striking. It doesn't hold up at the very end of it once he gets out and then he starts clobbering you on the ground and then on the feet, on the ground, all that stuff. It doesn't matter anymore because he's winning now and he wins the fight. So people are still holding on to that, and it's like, just stop. But they're definitely giving him Josh Emmett. But I just need to make this video because I've been pretty frustrated with Brian Ortega and just how, like, featherweight's probably one of my favorite divisions when it comes to, like, these fighters on it. Like, Ilya Topuria, Max Holloway, Volkanovski, Yair, in terms of fighting personality, I don't understand his appeal. We got some good people in that, and Volkanovski is considered probably one of the best fighters of all time right now. But we just have these random, like, we got some of these fighters in here who just aren't making moves. Like, Giga Chikadze just made his return, was it the Independence Day card? the Mexican Independence Day card. I want to say that's what it was, against Alex Caceres, who I think's unranked. He's unranked or he's number 15, which, I mean, he had to take time off from, like, January, where he took, like, a career amount of damage, which made sense. But he returned. He returned quicker than freaking Brian Ortega has. Brian Ortega doesn't have any announcements of any fights coming up. There's been no talks about it. Dana, UFC don't seem to be... maybe they forgot about him, honestly. That's maybe the answer, I'm going to be honest.